and make this available as we have done all summer to you, so you can go back and watch it at your own leisure and fast forward, pause, rewind, all those good things. So I hope you all are doing well. I hope everyone is getting enough sleep and taking care of yourselves as we start to kind of, now with a delayed start, get into the school year. And so here today, our session is going to be covering what are the content focused reports. I guess specifically, the better terminology would be to call them the content focused dashboards. And so I'm joined with a co-creator of the dashboards. And if you've been in a session with me before, Jake will probably be very familiar. And if you're from Putnam County, chances are you know Jake as well. But I'm joined by Jake Massey from NEFEC, and he's had a hand in developing these dashboards along with myself, getting all the data right. And we share all this background data together. And so he's going to be here to jump in, look for any opportunities to add, help answer questions, and help moderate the chat. So if you have questions today, please type them into the chat box. Like I said, Jake's an expert on this. He'll be moderating the chat. And if you really feel so inclined, I'm totally 100% good with you turning on your mic, interrupting, and just being like, "Ooh, Adam, hold on one second. Adam, let me ask this question." And we'll stop. I'll show you things again. I've kind of learned to move a little bit slower now on my machine when I'm showing directions or prompting or saying click here, click there. So I'll try to be really respectful today of that. But if you want me to show you something again, of course, this is our time to do that. And with this being such a small but powerful package, like little Napoleon, maybe this package has like a Napoleon complex. I doubt that will take the 2 hours today. So we'll have lots of time for questions and answers as we go throughout the day. Does anybody have any questions, any comments, any concerns before we get started? Oh, I see Rhonda Garner. You completely knocked your coffee all over the counter. It is the worst curse whatsoever. Yeah. But does anyone have any questions or anything before we get started? All right. Let's see. We've got so many familiar faces. I can't believe some of you guys aren't sick of us by now. That is awesome. Thank you for joining. I can tell that some of you are just Tech Tuesday fiends. You just can't get enough of that. So we love it. We're so glad that you're here. All right. Again, if you do have questions, type them in the chat box, unmute your mic, ask away. You should be able to hear. It looks like all the audio and everything's fine. I'm checking it. And I'm now going to share my screen with you. Now, last time, I will say, I don't know what's up with the ghost in my machine. Last time I did this, I froze up, and Jake told me I froze in a very unflattering position on my camera. So when I press the button, I'm going to be in a very flattering position. In case I freeze, I'll freeze like this. I don't think I froze that time. Hopefully I didn't freeze that time. Hopefully you're able to see my screen.
You're good to go, man. Good to go.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate that vote of confidence here. All right. So I'm going to start at the beginning. Begin the beginning. All right. So a lot of us, and primarily, let me go ahead and start. Let me start at the real beginning. This is really about EOCs and statewide assessments that haven't been FSA. So this is primarily for civics, U.S. history, 5th and 8th grade science, as well as biology. Now, if you don't teach one of those social studies or sciences, don't fret. I have had great conversations with ELA teachers as well as math teachers who wanted kind of a way to start connecting resources, connecting text, connecting practical problems to content that would that students would be able to see, and there would be stakes around it, right? A lot of ELA teachers have been asking great questions because of some legislation years back about what is taught in social studies classes. How can I help build background knowledge in my own ELA classroom by using texts that feature persons, places, or things in a historical context? And so I just wanted to start off by saying that. Now, if you're an instructional coach, or if you're someone who is assisting educators in the classroom at any level, you should find this beneficial, and I hope that you ask questions as we go throughout the day. So I'm starting off here at CPOMS. This should look somewhat familiar, and I'm looking at just an example course here, United States history. And so this is the high school US history class. And the first thing I see is that when it comes to course standards, there are 129 course standards for US history. There are roughly 180 days in a school year, give or take, and it's normal. And not to mention, you have specials that day, you have a guest speaker, there are photos being taken, there are club activities. That 180 starts to shrink down. So 129 is representative in this class of all history from the Civil War to the present day. So we're talking about 160 years of history condensed down into a year-long course with 129 standards. Some of these standards have multiple people, places, and things contained within them as well. And this may be similar to how you feel about your course or the evidence that's there in your course. Lots of standards, lots of content, not enough time to cover it. And so these content-focused dashboards that we're going to be showing today, I don't want to set the tone that they're the end-all be-all. They are a layer when it comes to planning for success in a classroom and planning for success with your instructional practice. It's just another layer to consider. Because if you were to try to give equal time in a US history class, for example, for 129 standards, you could roughly probably hit a standard or two a day, not even two, just a standard a day. It's going to be very, very surface level. And we know that really good colleagues that we see, and probably some of you, are masters at stacking some of these standards together like Lego blocks, right? Rather than taking this one in isolation, I can chunk it with another set of standards and or more benchmarks, and I can build a lesson around that to kind of save some time and to act efficiently. So the state of Florida, Florida DOE, for the last 7 years or so, has been publishing content focus reports. And the terminology there that we use moving forward, the difference between a report and dashboard should be glaring in a few minutes when I show you the dashboard. So on the Florida DOE website, when it comes to the EOC courses, you're greeted by this web page right here. And I want to highlight the first couple sentences here, and I want you to kind of take a look at these with me. Content focus is a term that defines the specific content measured by each test item. These are generated after reporting is completed for each assessment administration. Content focus reports should not be used to make decisions about instruction at the individual student level. Now that's kind of like the general warning. And at the bottom here, they have links to where you can download these PDF reports. So if we click on biology, you'll be able to see this here. Here's what a sample biology content focused report looks like. The first thing that we notice is there are 4 different test forms that are used for these EOCs. Now, think about this again, to randomize, to mitigate copying or potential cheating. The state administers multiple different test forms. Sometimes a school site may test a test form. Sometimes there may be multiple test forms at a school site. You don't know because it's supposed to be randomized. And what these tables are showing us here are the different reporting categories. Assessments are broken down into those reporting categories that should mirror the standards that are contained within the course themselves. So when it comes to biology, reporting category 1 is molecular and cellular biology. So all of the benchmarks that are that go along with that reporting category you see right here. So as I look at this, the first benchmark is this Life Science 14.1. And we see some text, and then we also see the number of points possible. Now, you have to really know your standards or benchmarks, and you have to have another layer that coincides with this. Because looking at the text that is provided under the content focus column, this is not the definition of that benchmark. This is, in a sense, well, this is, I guess would be more definitive, how the item writers, the people that have designed the questions and utilized stimulus, this is how they've broken down a large benchmark into something that can be tested via a multiple choice item. So while 14.1 is a very big benchmark, we can't test that big conceptual benchmark. Sorry, my phone was just going crazy. I guess there's a sale at Banana Republic. They can't test that whole big conceptual benchmark with one multiple choice item that covers everything. So here's what they've done. They've written an item around cell theory and advances in science, and then another one in identifying what is science and cell theory. So it's an element of that benchmark that can be utilized to actually assess knowledge. We can design an item around that. So looking at here, there were 2 points possible for this benchmark using this specific content focus. Think about that magnifying glass, how it creates that parabolic effect of light, and you know, it's great for burning anthills as a kid. But that same level of focus, looking at a benchmark down to a pinpointed specific piece of that concept, and then creating the item. So in a sense, you get these long reports that show you the different reporting categories and that show you how many points were possible on this test form, and then how many points were possible for the total reporting category. And so this is just 1 year. So we thought here at NEFAC, how do you make sense if there are 5 years of biology content focus reports, and each one of those have 4 different test forms? How can you reflect upon your pacing guide, your curriculum map, the resources that you've pulled for classroom instruction use? How can you make sense of this and tell what historically and traditionally has been a bigger focus on the assessment? Now, as I went down this road, I have come to find out that lots of larger school districts, high performing school districts, medium sized districts, they had already been doing this in some form or fashion. Their instructional coaches, their content specialists, they had been doing, but we had no tool to aggregate all this data at the benchmark level and say, over time, this has been emphasized way more than this has. And so that's the premise of this whole endeavor to create the dashboard, is to take years and years of tables with points possible, with benchmarks, and with the specific content focus. How can we visualize that? And so that's what led us to create what you see here, which is the actual dashboard. Now, what's different between a report and a dashboard? Well, if we look here, we're looking at the history content focus report. I can't click or interact with this at all. It's static, it's not dynamic. And again, it doesn't aggregate across all test forms for all years that these reports have been made available. But here, in a sense, is what you have when you do make sense of all that data. So what we're looking at right here, and I know it's probably pretty small on your screen, but I'll zoom in to this. This is an interactive dashboard that anyone can have free access to look at specific benchmarks, and particularly look at how have they been emphasized over time. That's probably the best way to phrase that. And then also, how have these big concepts been broken down into actual items on the assessment? And then how have those been emphasized? So there is no way for you to mess these up. There's no way for you to affect Jake and mine's data. You could click and just totally manipulate this guy out. And the worst case scenario, you can hit F5 on your machine to refresh, or just come up here and hit the refresh button, and it all resets back to default. We thought of this as being that additional layer when it comes time to plan for instruction at all these different levels, at the curriculum map level, at the pacing guide level, at the lesson plan level, looking at for text and additional supplemental resources, and even for those individuals in the districts who are designing assessments for progress monitoring, as a way to say, our progress monitoring is in alignment with the history of the assessment in the state of Florida, or we can make some tweaks to some benchmarks and how we emphasize them on our progress monitoring to get a more accurate sense of how our students are going to do. It doesn't make any sense if your progress monitoring tool doesn't align with the historical evidence and the historical data of the assessment itself. If the progress monitoring is emphasizing benchmarks that traditionally have received the lowest amount of points possible over time, and the ones that have received the largest amount of points possible over the times are de-emphasized, then you've got a misalignment issue. And I've also found that this is a great way just to learn benchmarks. If you're new, if you're new to your subject area, or you're new to your school, you're new to Florida, this would be a great way to familiarize it. So as I said before, you can't mess this up. It's interactive. So let me show you some of the interactive elements. And I'll give you the link, or if Jake, if you want to put the bit.ly link into the chat box, that would be awesome to the NEFEC data visualization site. But all this is free. All this you can access right now. And also, because there was no assessment for this past spring, none of this is going to change. So this is still what we would consider current, even though it goes up to 2019. It's still the best thing that we have right now. So again, fifth and eighth grade science is on here, biology, civics, and US history. And again, I always like to put this in front of different subject area teachers like health science, ELA, so that they can see what is being emphasized or what should be emphasized to give students the best chance for success on the assessment. So I have this little radio button, click to US history. That's what it comes up as the default. But if you wanted to, watch what happens to the screen when I click on fifth grade science. You'll notice that everything changes. If I were to click biology, you'll notice that the bars on the left side change. And also this question changes to reflect and show that you're now looking at biology benchmarks. I'm going to go back to US history. Now, if you wanted to, you could change the date range. There's a little slider bar here. So if I were to slide it to just take a look at the last 2 years, you'll notice that this is changing those horizontal bars on the left-hand side somewhat because I'm filtering out previous year's data. And if I want to open it wide up, notice again, for US history, we have data going all the way back to 2012. You may be wondering right now, why isn't there ELA in math? There should be ELA 3rd grade through 10th grade. There should be math going all the way up to what, 8th grade. When the FSA came into existence, it was not required that the company who designed that assessment provide this content focus breakdown. Now, there has been legislation that's been created to force the publisher of the FSA, and who knows what it's going to be moving forward, and if this is even going to be a thing. But it hasn't been emphasized to force the test designers to provide this for ELA and for math. Maybe that's forthcoming under the new assessment and the new standards, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. So, so I've selected US history. I want to see all the data for all the years. And US history is a very specific type of course. And I worked with some US history teachers in Putnam County who gave me some great feedback for this. When you teach history, it behooves you to start at the beginning to build context and to move closer and closer into the present day. Now, there are some radical classrooms out there that start at the present day and move their way backwards. I don't know if that's effective or not, but if students are into it and if they're learning, then maybe that's a good thing. But traditionally, we start at the beginning and work our way to the present day. So this first benchmark that you see here for US history, that's that pivot period that starts this course during the Civil War. Now, notice you can hover your mouse cursor. I'm just resting it over a description to actually read what that benchmark's definition is. You can also click on it and you'll see over here the description appears on the dashboard right here. So that's another way. Some of these look a little bit broken, so I'm gonna have to take a look at that. Some of these are working, some of these aren't. But you can hover for most of these and see what the benchmark description is. Click on it, notice it highlights it, and it also brings your definition over here into this box so you can read it.
Adam, real quick, want to address a comment I think was a pretty good question. What is the difference between a content focus report and the test blueprint? So the test blueprint is something you're probably familiar with really any subject. And I answered this in the chat, but I wanted to make sure I was clear on this too. the test blueprint is going to show percentages based on, and actually I put standard in the chat, but that's actually wrong. It's actually just based on the strand or the subcategory of standards. So, for example, the one that we're looking at here, Adam, you'll have to help me because I don't know the science benchmark strands very well. What does A stand for?
Well, it's going to be the late 19th century.
That reporting category. Yeah. So your blueprint is just going to show a percentage of this highest level, just the reporting category. You don't get any information per standard or per the content focus, which is what the content focus report does. So it actually is even a deeper look than just the standard. So you can add them up and see, how many times each standard was assessed, but then there's an even further breakdown. So it's sort of the most granular look you have, and the test blueprint is the most sort of high level look that you have. And then Adam, will you also take just a second to show everyone from the bit.ly link how to get to the content focus report? Because there are quite a few links on our data visualization page, and there was a question about that as well.
Sure, and that's good feedback for me. We probably should have started there. So there's a couple ways to access this, and thank you so much, Jake, that was a great interjection there. There's a couple ways that you can get there because we wanted to give you options. The way that I always go is by using this short bit.ly link. It's bit.ly/NEFEC data visualizations. I know it's a mouthful, but if you Control D on your PC or Command D on your Mac, you can bookmark this and always get to it really quickly. The NEFEC has to be all capitalized. The D in data and the V in visualizations, those have to be capitalized as well. And it's visualizations plural. That is the short link that will always take you to our data visualizations kind of just warehouse that we hold everything. So this takes you to this web page. Let me see if I can make it just a tiny bit smaller so we can fit it all on the page. So this is where we at our consortium house different data visualizations. So the column that is on the left-hand side for public visualizations, these are our free public visualizations that we update every time that there's new data made available, and it's open for anyone to access at any given time. And the third choice that is in the first column is the content focus reports. So if you click that, it will automatically take you to this page right here where you can access it. So it doesn't matter what your content area is, it's the same link every single time. And I got that by going to bit.ly/NEFEC all capital, data with a capital D, visual, I'm challenging myself, to try and type and talk, capital D, capital V, remember. And when you get there, if you are if you're on Chrome like I am, you can just simply click the star right here to actually make that a bookmark, so you don't have to remember that that bit.ly link. And then content focus reports get you where you need to go. So are there any other questions about that, or anybody want to ask anything in the chat or unmute your mic before we move on? All right. So essentially, the purpose of this is to be able to locate a specific benchmark, look how it's been emphasized over time on the assessment, and then drill down to how have item writers written these items. So for example, if I scroll, because remember, there are so many benchmarks for US history, not all of them are assessed, but look, if I use this little slider, there's a lot here. And Jake brought out a good point about those reporting categories. So everything yellow, that's reporting category 1, everything green, that's reporting category 2, and everything that's purple, that's that more present day reporting category for US history. You'll see the same things when you click on like science, for example. These colors represent, is it life science, physical science, just to reflect that reporting category. But when we look at US history, because again, we're thinking chronologically, we're starting at A 2.1 and moving our way down through all the benchmarks through time. So this top benchmark right here, the number 45 that I see that's attributed to this bar on this horizontal bar graph right here shows 45. What this 45 means is that across the 7 years of content focus reports, across all 4 test forms that have been provided, there have been 45 possible points made available to students for this specific benchmark. Now, contrast that with, here is A 3.3. It only has a 9 next to it. That means that in 7 years, the historical data shows that across 4 test forms, there have only been 9 possible points made available for this specific benchmark. I'm going to click on this 45 again. So the definition or the description of that benchmark is review the causes and consequences of the Civil War. That is, you could take whole college seminars for semesters on end just about the causes and consequences of the Civil War. Now, there's some more words here. Examples may include, but are not limited to, slavery, states' rights, territorial claims, abolitionist movement, regional differences, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So it's big. You can understand, you can start to see, well, this would be something that would be great to assess a lot of over time and attribute lots of points, because it's so, the breadth and the scope of this is so entirely huge. But remember, the point of this is to get that magnifying glass in focus and look at what are the specific content pieces. So underneath this description, you'll see this emphasis. This is how the item writers have broken down that big conceptual, lots of years benchmark into something you can actually write items about. So the first one is the Anaconda Plan and sectional issues. Well, this is very helpful for me if I was instructing this in the classroom to know that I've got the Civil War, but really the thing that's been had the most points possible attributed to it has been the Anaconda Plan and sectional issues. So I'm going to make sure that when I do some direct instruction, when we do pull a text to read in class, that it is focused around this. So notice here, though, as I scroll through, what are some other content focuses for this benchmark? Sectional issues appears again. Sectional issues appears again. Sectional issues appears again. Now, the reason why these don't get aggregated together is sometimes those items writers like to switch things up. So we wanted teachers and coaches to be able to see how has this been broken down differently year to year. Sectional issues appears quite a bit. So I'm thinking right now that if I don't cover sectional issues in the class, if it's not part of my spiral review as we move forward throughout the year, then chances are my students are going to see this on the U.S. history exam. And if I haven't covered it, then the points possible that are made available for this, it's going to be totally random and just taken up to chance if the students are able to get this. Notice down here, what I think is kind of interesting is the remarks and examples that were included in the description mentioned 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. If I look here and I scroll through here, I don't see anything totally specific to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Isn't that interesting? Now, that does have a place, and that will come up later, but not specific to this benchmark, even though it's included in the description from the benchmark writers. So something else that you can do here that I probably should have mentioned a minute ago is that this little box on the right-hand side is interactive. You see the little CPOMS logo down here. If you just click this, it's automatically going to take you to the CPOMS website, to that specific benchmark, so that you have all the resources right off the bat so you can look into this. So any of those access points, the related resources, the benchmark clarifications, it's all here. So essentially, this content focus dashboard becomes kind of a clearinghouse for all things related to these benchmarks. Let's take a look at that with 5th grade science. I'll just mimic this again. Notice when I change off of US history, because it's the default one, that it's just blank white space over in the right-hand columns here. If I actually click, let's look at this. Oh my gosh. Life Science 17.1 has 25 points possible historically attributed to this. So if I click that, I get the description, and I also get the content focus breakdown. Now this is showing me that, okay, and I can even hover my mouse cursor over this to read it a little clearer. I've got to focus on characteristics, environmentally influenced, the impact on the environment. What are animals' impact on the environment? Physical so this is helping me shape where should I spend the most time in the classroom on this content. Now, is it the end all be all? No, because again, there's that warning about you can't really predict what's on the assessment. But I challenge that by saying, if I know what's happened over the last 7 years on the assessment, then I feel confident that maybe that could be mimicked going forward. But again, how do you hone down such big, broad topics? Let's see here. I'm looking for one that was... Here's something interesting. When you start looking at what hasn't been emphasized as well, you get some interesting things. Examine the changing status of women in the United States from post-World War II to the present day. There has only been one possible point. That means probably one item for 1 point across 4 test forms for all of these years that we've had data related to this benchmark. This really, when you start looking at your calendar of instruction, you start looking at your pacing guide, I think something that is a good practice is to think about, am I teaching something with high value right before Thanksgiving break, right before Christmas break, right before spring break, right before all these things where maybe I don't have lots of students in the classroom right now. And this content's so important that we've got to be in our regular routine so that students are able to kind of process and do activities around these specific benchmarks here. I've just talked a whole lot. Jake, are there any questions, or does anyone have any questions that they want to ask?
I don't see any questions. Comment on having CPALMs there. Yeah, that was one of the most recent updates, and definitely one of my favorite updates to that. But I do want to mention there were some comments early on about the usability of this and the sort of importance of this with some younger grade levels that aren't necessarily assessed, or just really any grade level that's outside of these assessed windows. And what I think is so great about this tool is, when we first looked at the original content focus reports as they're released in just various PDFs, that's very taxing and a lot of work for someone who is in one of those tested subject areas. I mean, the amount of time you would have to invest as a 5th grade science teacher to really dive into those PDF reports to get the same information would, I don't want to say it wouldn't be worth it, but it would, or that it wouldn't be worth it, but it would certainly be a lot of work. And then most certainly for grade levels outside of that, as a 4th grade teacher, I'm certainly, probably not going to be willing to invest that amount of time into looking at this. And as a 3rd grade or 2nd grade, 1st grade, kindergarten, insert any of the above. But what's so valuable about this is, first of all, we can see other grade level standards, for example, in 5th and 8th grade science, where we have standards that aren't 5th or 8th grade science standards. They fall on the grade levels before. And so as a 3rd grade or a 4th grade teacher, as a 6th grade or as a 7th grade teacher, you can see what those hot, I keep saying standard, I got to reframe myself for talking about science. I got to use the word benchmark. We can use, we can find what are those hot benchmarks in my grade level. But even as a kindergarten or 1st or 2nd grade teacher, at a very quick glance, just minutes of investment, you can see what some of the content is that is highlighted or is important across grade levels going into 5th grade, going into 8th grade. And I think just as simple as finding content that you're using in reading, or content and scenarios that you're going to use in a math problem, just to start building background knowledge. And as easy as this tool is to very quickly see what that content is, I think it's worth the time. I think it's worth the 5 minutes that it would take just to get an idea for the content that I want to look for when I'm looking for some new material to do as a read aloud to my kindergartners. I could jump into the 5th grade report and see, when they get into 3rd grade, when they get into 5th grade, what content's going to be important, and let me start building that background knowledge.
Yeah, you brought up a great point. I'm so glad you mentioned that there are, when we look at science, even though we call it the 5th or the 8th grade statewide assessment, it's different in that it's a cumulative assessment across 3 years. So this benchmark right here is SC3. Again, it's a life science. This is what's going to appear on the 5th grade assessment, is a 3rd grade benchmark. Describes structures in plants and their role in food production, support, water, and nutrient transport and reproduction. So that's got to stay in a student's schema from the 3rd grade all the way to the end of the 5th grade. This means that the fourth grade teacher should include this in spiral review, as well as the fifth grade teacher, and vertically build upon that. And this is great for letting the fourth grade teachers know exactly what could you expect to see on the fifth grade assessment as far as your fourth grade benchmarks. And it's even more glaring when you look at an eighth grade science assessment, because the distribution of benchmarks, I won't say it's even, like 33.33% for sixth, seventh, and eighth. Certainly, seventh grade has its fair share of benchmarks that appear on that assessment.
Adam, can I ask a question real quick?
Yes, ma'am.
So the higher the number, that means on the assessment, that content is covered more on the assessment than say benchmarks or standards with the lower numbers. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, the number. I'm sorry, I got a little static. The number that you see here, that is the points that have been made possible over time. So if there's more points possible, we generally like to think that it's either there's greater gravity given to that specific benchmark, there's more items on the assessment for that benchmark, there's more items across the test forms for that specific benchmark. Now, this isn't, again, these are points possible, but this should give you a sense of the proportion of one benchmark versus another benchmark. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. I was asking because last year I teach first grade and there was a math assessment made and teachers had input about the test items that should be on that assessment. And, if we had something like this, of course, I know they don't make it for lower grades of what would show up on like a third grade assessment that we can focus on in the lower grades is the reason I was asking. So thank you. You cleared that up.
No, and you're kind of thinking, your thought process, you're on a really good track right here, because you probably have colleagues who are teaching this back in your home and district. So for example, this third grade benchmark, that it's got some good points possible. It's not low and it's not towards the high end. But what this is telling me is that the structure of plants and how they, basically, we're talking about photosynthesis here. This is something that we could talk to first and second graders. We could build whole entire text sets and units around plants and the environment to help build background knowledge. Again, this is all of us on a ship in the ocean working together to make sure this ship doesn't sink. So any little thing that you can do, any little thing that I can do that's going to have a big impact later on, we've got to pull together as a crew, no matter if we're up on the top sail or if we're down in the hold. So yeah, this thought process of, I just found out that the knowledge of photosynthesis and plants are important. Let's go look at our little library. Let's find out, what books do we have? What would be a fun activity that kids could do so we could build their schema so that eventually it's got some payoff for it, right? So I love that idea of vertical planning. And even though I don't own it, is there a place in here for me to manipulate my content to attribute to a bigger and larger understanding? I get really passionate, but that was great. Anything else? Because really, I mean, I told you this was going to be a shorter Tech Tuesday today, because it really just kind of behooves you to go play. And again, if you're not teaching one of these subjects, but you have a colleague back at your school site or back at your district, this is your best friend you've grown up with, someone who's new, you can share this with them and make their day and do exactly what I'm doing. Sit side by side and say, these numbers here, these are the points possible over time. So this is what they've been aggregated to. You see these two that are really, really longer than the other ones? That's because this is really important on this assessment, which the nature of science, whether it's 5th grade, 8th grade, and then how that plays into biology, that's the biggest bang for your buck. That is, if I could say anything to any educator, helping students understand the nature of science is crucial to success, and also just being really critical in life as well. So that's a good one. But yeah, here's the biology, because we didn't look at that. Here's a breakdown of the less benchmarks, but again, nature of science is the longest bar as part of this graph right here that we can see. Civics. Now, civics works a little bit differently because of how CPOMS houses civics benchmarks. So if I look here, this benchmark for civics, evaluate rights contained in the Bill of Rights and other amendments to the Constitution. This is one of the biggest benchmarks, C.2.4. If I click it and I click on this to be taken to CPOMS, it works a little bit different than the other ones, because you have to go to the, what is it? The related resources, and I'm not sure because they have just changed this around. So I'm going to be real vulnerable and say that I knew that it operated differently because they were sending us to a different website. And now I don't want to take up too much time doing this, but just know that if you're teaching civics, it works a little bit differently than the other ones do. Now I can't find it, but I knew that it was here somewhere. Anyway, any other questions that anyone has?
Hey, Adam.
Yeah.
This is Robert. Something that's, I don't know if you guys are going to handle it, but Bitmoji classrooms have really started taking off.
I'm sorry, Robert, you cut out for a second there. Ask your question again.
Bitmoji classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with those?
I am not.
Okay. I know several people are starting to really get into that, and I was just having a little bit of trouble, but I'll keep looking on YouTube and working with my colleagues. Just
Awesome.
wanted to ask. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah. Hey, that's what we're here for. Oh, Bitmoji extension for the Google browser. I actually just got rid of that because I never used it anymore. All right. Are there any other questions before we exit for the day? Again, this one was a shorter one because it's all self-contained on this web page. And any other questions for the chat box or turn on your mic? Thank you. And Robert, I hope you're looking at the chat. Kara Washington said there's a fabulous group on Facebook, Bitmoji Craze for Educator. So you may want to check that. Thank you, Tony, Andrea, Karma, Lisa, Miriam. So many familiar faces. I appreciate it so much. Kutina, thank you. You're just going for the perfect attendance record for Tech Tuesday, aren't you, Kutina? You're just here all the time. All right, well, thank you guys. And listen, if you have any questions, about this. Let's say a week or two passes and you're talking to a colleague, reach out to myself or to Jake here at the district office, at the NEFAC offices, and we would be more than happy to help you on a call or to set up another Google Meets, because we believe in this as a tool to help you be successful in planning instruction in your classroom. So just feel free to reach out to us at any time. We'd love to help you. But with that being it, thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time this Tuesday. This recording will render, and remember, you can come back to the meeting invite and watch the recording later at your own time. So it should be ready in about an hour or so. And if you're going to be joining us for, I will see you at 1 o'clock today. Have a good afternoon. Enjoy your lunch. Don't drop your lunch on the ground if you can help it. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.